A Navy SEAL and his dog were lost deep in a desolate forest, where no human footprints remained to guide the way. The blizzard arrived too quickly, layers of heavy snow erasing the trail, all sense of direction, and any hope of turning back safely. As the cold cut through and darkness closed in, the soldier's survival instincts awakened, and he chose to place his trust in his dog. Step by step through the storm, they followed a frozen stream, fragile as the last thread of hope leading them forward. Then, through the snow and silence, a mysterious shelter appeared, buried beneath ice and time. No one knows who built it, only that it revealed itself at the exact moment they needed it most. Before we begin the story, tell us where you're watching from, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the strength to keep sharing stories like this. And now, let's begin. Ronan Hale had planned to be back on pavement before nightfall. That was the lie he told himself when he stepped off the marked trail and into the trees, boots crunching softly over old snow that had hardened into a thin, brittle crust. The northern forest looked calm that morning, pines standing tall and evenly spaced, their needles dark against a pale sky, the air so clear it felt sharpened. Light moved cleanly here. Sound carried farther than it should have. It was the kind of place that made a man forget how fast things could turn. Ronan was 35, just over 6 feet tall, built the way years of military discipline shaped a body, compact, efficient, nothing wasted. He wore no beard. His jaw was square, clean-shaven, the lines of it cut sharp by cold wind and habit. His hair, dark brown and cropped short in a military style that had grown just a fraction longer since leaving active service, refused to lie flat no matter how often he trimmed it himself. The northern light caught silver already threading at his temples, frost that never quite melted. His eyes were gray-blue, steady, unhurried. The kind of eyes that did not rush to judgment because they had already seen most outcomes before. At his side moved Vesper. The German Shepherd was 5 years old, large without being heavy, his coat a layered blend of cream, gray, and black, dark along the spine, lighter at the chest and legs. Snow clung to his fur in soft clumps that never seemed to bother him. His amber eyes stayed alert, calm, tracking movement the way a compass needle tracks north. A black harness wrapped his chest, simple and worn, edged with a dark red trim that had faded just enough to look earned. Vesper did not pull at the lead. He did not lag behind. He matched Ronan's pace exactly, as if they were tethered by something older than the strap in Ronan's gloved hand. The weather began to shift without announcement. It started with the wind. Nothing dramatic, just a change in pressure that Ronan felt more in his bones than on his skin. The air thickened slightly, the clean edge of it dulled. Above the tree line, clouds gathered with quiet efficiency, folding into one another until the sky lost its depth. Ronan checked his watch out of habit, not because it mattered. Time had stopped meaning much to him in the way civilians used it. He measured days by light and weather now, by distance and fatigue. Snow began to fall again, not the gentle kind. These flakes were smaller, sharper, driven sideways by a wind that picked up speed with each minute. The trail markings faded quickly, swallowed by white. The forest tightened around them, trees closing ranks, branches creaking softly under fresh weight. Ronan slowed, scanning the terrain. He wasn't lost. Not yet. But the landmarks he had logged earlier were gone, erased by the storm's efficiency. His phone stayed buried in his jacket, battery already drained by the cold. GPS was unreliable this far north, even on good days. He trusted his senses more than electronics anyway. Still, Something felt off. Vesper felt it first. The dog slowed to a stop so sudden that the leash went taut in Ronan's hand. Vesper's ears rose, angled forward, not in alarm but in focus. His body shifted slightly to the left, nose lifting as he sampled the air. Ronan frowned. "What is it?" Vesper did not look back. He took one step forward, then stopped again, paws planted wide, weight settled as if the ground itself had told him to hold. Ronan scanned the trees, the snow, the empty white space between trunks. Nothing moved, no sound beyond the wind threading through branches. "This isn't a squirrel," Ronan muttered. Vesper's tail gave a single, slow sweep. Not excitement, not fear, decision. Ronan crouched, resting one gloved hand on his knee, the other loosening the leash just enough to give the dog room. He studied Vesper's posture the way he used to study men on patrol. Shoulders, tension, breath. This wasn't hesitation. It was recognition. The dog angled his body downslope, toward a shallow depression in the land that Ronan hadn't noticed before. Snow lay differently there, smoother, slightly darker beneath the white. Vesper took another step, then another, careful but certain. Ronan hesitated. Training told him to stick to known paths, to avoid low ground in storms. Experience told him something else entirely. When instinct this quiet spoke, it was worth listening. He exhaled once, slow and controlled. "All right," he said. "Show me." They moved together down the slope, boots and paws crunching in a steady rhythm. The wind sharpened as they descended, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible sound beneath the storm, a hollow hush that did not belong to snow or trees, water, not flowing freely, something constrained, pressed flat and forced to move anyway. The stream appeared gradually, revealed by subtle shifts in the land rather than sight alone. A narrow channel cut through the forest, its surface sealed under a thick lid of ice, snow piled unevenly along its edges. The ice hummed faintly under the pressure of movement beneath. Vesper's pace quickened slightly, confidence building. Ronan followed, heart settling into a familiar cadence. Water led somewhere. Water meant terrain changes, possible structures, old routes cut by men long before trails were marked on maps. The light began to fail faster than it should have. The sky dimmed into a dull, uniform gray, the kind that erased depth perception and made distance a liar. Snow thickened, stinging exposed skin. Ronan pulled his collar higher, the worn fabric of his olive-gray tactical shirt soft against his neck, the red thermal layer beneath holding what warmth it could. They had been walking maybe 20 minutes when Vesper stopped again. This time the stop was different. The dog did not freeze. He sat. Right there in the snow, directly beside the frozen stream, Vesper lowered his haunches and looked up at Ronan, not pleading, not anxious, simply expectant. Ronan stared down at him. A memory stirred, uninvited, a different terrain, a different cold. A moment years ago when Vesper, then younger, leaner, still learning, had done the same thing outside a compound half a world away. Sat, waited, refused to move. That day, Ronan had ignored him. The explosion had come seconds later, unswallowed. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I remember." He followed Vesper's gaze. At first, there was nothing. Just snow, trees, the curve of the bank. Then the shape resolved itself. Not a house, not really. A structure cut into the hillside, half buried beneath drifts and time. Concrete, aged and stained, reinforced at the edges. A door set flush with the earth. Metal dulled by years of weather, its outline barely visible beneath a crust of ice. A shelter. Ronan approached slowly, every sense alert. He checked the ground for tracks. None recent. Snow lay untouched, smooth as pressed linen. The door bore no sign. No lock beyond a heavy handle designed for gloved hands. Vesper rose and moved to the side, positioning himself just off Ronan's right leg, eyes scanning the tree line. Ronan rested his palm against the door. Cold bit through the leather of his glove. Solid, thick. He leaned in, listening. Nothing. The wind surged again, stronger now, driving snow in sharp sheets across the clearing. Night was coming fast, too fast. Ronan made the call. He pulled the handle. The door opened inward with a low, controlled creak, releasing a breath of air that smelled faintly of metal, old wood, and something clean, maintained, not abandoned. Warmth did not rush out, but the cold eased just enough. Vesper stepped forward first, entering without hesitation. He paused just inside, ears high, then moved methodically along the interior wall, checking corners, sniffing vents, mapping the space with a precision no blueprint could match. Ronan followed, closing the door behind them, the storm's howl cut off abruptly. Inside, the shelter revealed itself not as comfort, but as intention. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with emergency supplies. A compact stove sat bolted to the floor. Tools hung in neat order. Everything had its place. Nothing was decorative. This place had been built by someone who understood winter. Ronan exhaled slowly, tension easing from his shoulders for the first time since the sky had darkened. "Good work," he murmured. Vesper's tail flicked once. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, two lives had found a pause. The door shut with a final heavy hush, and the storm became a distant animal, still furious, still present, but pushed behind concrete and earth. Ronan stood for a moment with his back to the metal, listening to his own breathing settle. The cold had followed them inside, clinging to fabric and hair and the seams of his gloves, but it no longer had teeth. Here, it was simply a fact. Manageable. Vesper moved through the shelter like a professional who had done this job longer than language existed. He kept his nose low, sweeping along the baseboards, pausing at vents, checking corners where shadow collected. His harness straps creaked softly as he shifted his weight. Every so often he stopped, head tilted, as if catching a sound Ronan couldn't hear. Ronan didn't interrupt him. In the teams, you learn to respect a teammate's process. You learn to let the one with the better angle do the clearing. The shelter was compact but purposeful, not cozy, not inviting. It felt like a tool, built to keep bodies alive, not to make them forget they could die. Shelves were set into the walls, packed with supplies that looked older than the LED panel mounted near the ceiling, but newer than the concrete itself. Cans of soup, vacuum-sealed rations, a stack of wool blankets in plastic, a medical kit labeled in block letters, a coil of rope, a hand-crank radio, 2 lanterns, a small fire extinguisher. Ronan's eyes tracked the inventory automatically, his mind arranging it into categories: heat, food, water, first aid, signaling, repair. He hated how easy it still was. His body might have left the Navy, but his brain still lived inside checklists. He shrugged his pack to the floor and rolled his shoulders. The worn olive-gray fabric of his tactical shirt pulled tight across his back, the red thermal layer visible at the collar where it met his skin. He didn't take off his boots yet. Not until he trusted the ground. Vesper reached the far wall and paused. There, bolted to the concrete, sat a compact stove, small, field-rugged, the kind designed to run hot without wasting fuel. A kettle rested on top, empty but clean. Beneath the stove, a thin layer of ash sat in the tray like proof of recent use, or at least recent care. Ronan crouched, running a gloved finger along the edge of the stove. The metal was cold, but not neglected. No thick rust, no sticky residue. Someone had maintained this. That was the first thing that bothered him. Not fear, not suspicion. Just a quiet, disciplined awareness that the world didn't often leave free shelter untouched unless there was a reason. He moved to the LED panel and traced the thin wiring that ran from it into a vented metal box on a shelf. A battery bank. Old, but arranged neatly. He followed the wiring with his gaze toward the back of the shelter, where a small, narrow window sat high, almost hidden. A slit, really, designed to admit light without inviting snow. A survival shelter, Ronan thought. Not a cabin, not a home. A place made for people who didn't plan to be caught out here. He stood again, flexing his hands. The cold had stiffened his fingers into a dull ache. He hated that ache more than pain. Pain meant you knew what was wrong. Stiffness meant time was taking something and not asking permission. Vesper returned to Ronan's side and sat, posture upright, eyes steady. "Clear," the dog's body said. Ronan exhaled slowly, then nodded once. "Good." He moved with deliberate restraint, touching only what he needed, disturbing as little as possible. He set his pack near the stove, placed his gloves on top, and unhooked his canteen. Water was the first problem. There was no running tap, no sink, but there were 2 sealed jugs on a lower shelf, labeled with dates in marker. Not fresh, but not ancient either. Ronan took one jug, turned it, checked the cap, listened for the slosh. Still sealed, still clean. He set it back. Not yet, he decided. Not unless he had to. He pulled a small metal bottle from his pack, a dented thing that had followed him through more states than he could count, and poured a thin stream into the kettle. The sound was a whisper against steel. Vesper's ears twitched at it, then relaxed. Ronan struck a match. The small flame flared, bright and fragile in the dim shelter. He held it to the stove's ignition point and watched the fire catch in a controlled bloom. Heat rose slowly, not dramatic, but real. The shelter began to shift around them, the air losing its sharp edge, the concrete becoming less hostile. Ronan leaned back against the wall and let the warmth touch his face. His eyes closed for 1 beat longer than necessary. It wasn't comfort that made his throat tighten. It was the fact that comfort still worked on him. He didn't like needing anything. He didn't like how quickly a human body could be bribed into believing it was safe. Vesper stood and padded to the door, then circled back, settling near Ronan's boots. His amber eyes tracked Ronan's movements with quiet attention, the way a dog watched, not because he was worried, but because watching was love. Ronan looked down at him, a humorless smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You're acting like you paid rent," he murmured. Vesper's tail thumped once against the floor. Fair point. The kettle began to tick as it warmed. Ronan poured the first hot water into a metal cup and held it between his hands, letting heat seep into the stiff joints of his fingers. He didn't drink yet. He just breathed in the faint metallic steam. Outside, the wind slammed against the hillside. Snow hissed across the buried roof like sand. Ronan's mind tried to do what it always did in quiet places. Reach backward. He saw, uninvited, a different kind of cold, a different sky, a different silence, one that didn't belong to forests, but to deserts before dawn. He remembered the feeling of waiting, the way time stretched thin, the way every sound could mean death. He forced the memory down. This was not that. This was just weather. Still, he caught himself glancing toward the shelves again. Supplies, too organized, too intact. And that strange mural-like wall section he hadn't looked at closely yet. It sat on the right side of the shelter, partially shielded by a support beam, a patch of interior paneling that didn't match the bare concrete around it. On it, faint shapes emerged in the dim light. Lines, colors worn thin, a suggestion of landscape and sky. Someone had painted it once with care. Ronan approached slowly. The painting showed a northern scene. Pines, a strip of blue water, a sun low on the horizon, the colors muted like memory. The brushwork was gentle, not technical. Whoever had done it hadn't been showing off. They'd been leaving something behind. Ronan's chest tightened again, softer this time. He had seen men leave flags and plaques and engraved brass. He had seen the way people tried to trap meaning in objects. This was different. This was someone saying, even here, even in a place built for survival, beauty matters. He reached out, then stopped short of touching it. Vesper came up beside him and sat, facing the wall as if it were a person. Ronan watched the dog's profile, ears alert but calm, muzzle still, breath slow. Yeah, Ronan said quietly. I see it. A strange tenderness rose in him, unexpected enough that it almost annoyed him. He didn't come out here to feel things. He came out here to stop feeling them. But the forest had its own plans. He turned away and returned to the stove. The kettle steamed now. Ronan poured a second cup, drank slowly, and let the heat settle into his stomach like a small promise. He ate a strip of jerky from his pack. His own food, not the shelter's. He refused to take more than he needed. Vesper ate his share with polite efficiency, then licked his lips and sighed softly, as if the day had been long but manageable. Ronan sat on the floor with his back against the wall, knees bent, boots still on. He watched the LED light flicker faintly as clouds passed over whatever solar source fed the battery. It was dim, but steady. Enough. He glanced at his old phone, powered off. No signal would matter until the storm eased. He'd tell someone he was fine later, when fine meant something more than not dead yet. Time stretched. The shelter made a low, continuous sound, a subtle creak of concrete settling under wind pressure, the faint pop of the stove as metal expanded. Nothing alarming, just the building proving it was alive enough to hold. Ronan's eyelids grew heavy. He fought it out of reflex. In the field, you didn't sleep when you were unsure of your surroundings. But Vesper was already down, body curled near Ronan's boots, head resting on his paws. The dog's breathing was slow, even, trusting. Ronan stared at him for a long moment. Vesper had never given his trust lightly. Ronan knew that better than anyone, which meant something about this place was acceptable. Ronan let his head rest back against the wall. He closed his eyes, but he didn't fully surrender. Not yet. A sound, barely a sound, slid through the shelter like a thought that wasn't his. Vesper's head lifted instantly. His ears angled upward, not toward the door, not toward the stove, but toward the ceiling where concrete met the buried earth above. His body stiffened, then went still in a way Ronan hadn't seen since the dog's working days. Ronan opened his eyes. Vesper rose without a growl, without a bark, and padded to the painted wall. He sat directly in front of it again, staring not at the brushstrokes, but at a spot just above them, where a hairline crack ran through the paneling. Then he did something that made Ronan's spine tighten. Vesper lowered his head and pressed his nose lightly to the crack, inhaling once, slow, deliberate, like he was reading a message written in air. Ronan pushed himself up, heart settling into that old, efficient rhythm. "What do you smell?" he whispered. Vesper didn't look back. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the shelter held its breath. And in that suspended moment, Ronan felt something he didn't have a better word for. An impression, almost spiritual in its quiet certainty. This place remembered people. Not ghosts, not magic. Just the stubborn residue of intention, left behind by someone who built survival into the earth and still made room for a painting. The moment passed. Vesper blinked, sat back, calm, returning to his posture. Ronan remained still for a beat longer, shaken by how close that instinctive reaction felt to a warning. Then he exhaled and moved, carefully, back to the stove. The storm lasted hours. Snow piled deeper against the hillside, sealing the shelter into the land like a buried seed. The cold outside rose and fell in waves, but the shelter's interior stayed workable. Cool, not warm, but livable. Ronan used only what he needed. He cleared a small vent opening at the base of the door with the edge of his boot, making sure airflow remained safe. He checked the stove twice, adjusted the flame, and kept his hands busy. Busy hands kept the mind from wandering. But the mind wandered anyway. He thought of the city he'd planned to return to, the offer waiting, the apartment he'd rented because it seemed like the right thing to do, like normalcy was a uniform he could put on. He thought of how the city sounded, constant, loud, impatient, how it demanded you explain yourself, how it made quiet men feel suspicious. Out here, the world didn't ask for explanations. It asked for competence. Ronan found himself staring at the painted wall again, the soft blues and greens barely visible under LED light. He wondered who had painted it. A wife? A daughter? A friend? Someone who had loved the builder enough to leave beauty in a bunker. Love did that, he thought. It made people build shelters for storms they hadn't met yet. Vesper shifted in his sleep, letting out a soft huff, then settled again. His paws twitched once, chasing something in a dream. Ronan's mouth tightened into a small smile. Even a dog had stories inside him. Night came without ceremony. The storm outside turned darker, the wind lower and meaner. The shelter's LED panel dimmed slightly as the battery cycled. Ronan stood, checked it, then stopped himself from doing more. He didn't need perfect. He needed enough. He spread one of his own blankets on the floor and sat with his back against the wall. He kept his boots on. He kept his watch on his wrist. He kept the same habits he always kept, because habits were anchors. Vesper rose once, padded to the door, sniffed, then returned and lay down with his body angled toward Ronan's legs, half guard, half comfort. Ronan stared at the ceiling, listening. No footsteps, no voices, no signs of anyone approaching, only wind, only snow, only the quiet insistence of a shelter that did not care who he was, only whether he treated it with respect. Ronan closed his eyes. He let himself sleep in fragments. When he woke, he couldn't tell how long it had been. The stove was lower, the air cooler. Vesper was awake, sitting upright, staring at the door with calm attention. Morning wasn't here yet, but it was coming, the darkness thinning, the storm losing its tight grip. Ronan rubbed his hands together and stood, joints stiff but functional. He checked the small window slit. Outside, the world was still white, but the wind sounded less like a threat and more like a tired man finishing an argument. He looked down at Vesper. "Soon," Ronan said quietly. Vesper's tail moved once, slow and steady. Ronan felt something unexpected in his chest. Not relief exactly, something closer to gratitude. Not for survival, that was just math, but for this pause, this strange, buried pocket of intention in the middle of nowhere. He didn't know who built it. He didn't know why it was still stocked. He only knew one thing with certainty. If Vesper had not led him here, the night outside would have been a different kind of story. Ronan tightened the straps of his pack, extinguished the stove carefully, and set everything back as he found it. He wasn't leaving yet, not until the storm fully relented. But he was awake now, fully awake. And so was the shelter. Morning did not arrive all at once. It seeped in, slowly, through the narrow slit of the shelter's high window. Light diluted by snow, filtered through cloud, thin but persistent. The storm had exhausted itself sometime before dawn. What remained was silence, deep and wide, the kind that felt earned. Ronan woke before fully opening his eyes. Habit again. His body cataloged the space automatically. Temperature tolerable, joints stiff but functional, no immediate threats. The stove had gone cold hours earlier, leaving the shelter cool but stable. His breath fogged faintly in front of him. Across from him, Vesper sat upright, already awake. The German shepherd's posture was alert but unhurried, amber eyes fixed on the door. His ears were forward, relaxed, not pinned, not raised high in alarm. This was not a warning stance. It was attention. Something had changed outside. Ronan rolled his shoulders and stood, boots scraping softly against concrete. He checked the battery indicator on the LED panel, dim but steady. Enough for now. He packed his blanket, shouldered his bag, and moved toward the door. Vesper rose immediately and positioned himself slightly ahead, angled just enough to block Ronan's path if needed. He did not growl. He did not tense. Ronan paused. "Easy," he murmured. Vesper glanced back at him once, then returned his gaze to the door. Ronan placed his hand on the metal handle. Cold bit through the glove again, sharp and clean. He opened the door slowly, letting daylight spill into the shelter. The world outside had been reset. Snow lay smooth and undisturbed across the clearing, reshaped into gentle drifts that caught the light like glass. The trees stood motionless, branches heavy, their shadows long and blue. The sky above was pale, a washed-out winter white that promised calm without warmth. Ronan stepped out, boots sinking slightly into the new snow. He scanned the perimeter, no tracks near the door, no signs of recent approach. The stream below was quiet now, ice dull under a dusting of fresh powder. Then he saw her. She stood at the edge of the tree line, not close enough to intrude, not far enough to be mistaken for chance. A small figure wrapped in layers of practical winter clothing, her posture upright despite the cold. She did not wave. She did not call out. She simply watched. Ronan felt Vesper shift beside him, body angling protectively, but without hostility. The dog's tail remained neutral, low but loose. His attention sharpened, not aggressive, not fearful, curious. Ronan raised one hand, palm open, a universal sign of acknowledgement. The woman did not return the gesture. Instead, she took a single step forward, careful and deliberate, her boots compressing the snow with a sound that carried clearly in the still air. She was older, late 60s, maybe early 70s, shorter than Ronan by a full head, her frame compact and sturdy, built for cold climates rather than youth. Her coat was heavy wool, dark and faded, cinched at the waist with a leather belt polished smooth by years of use. A knit cap covered most of her hair, but strands of iron gray escaped around her temples, catching the light. Her face was narrow, lined deeply not by softness but by observation. The kind of lines that came from watching weather, people, and time itself with equal patience. Her skin was pale, weathered, and unadorned. No makeup, no ornament. Her eyes were sharp and hazel, assessing without hurry. She stopped several yards away. "You came out of that storm alive," she said. Her voice was steady, low, with a faint northern lilt that placed her here long before Ronan ever arrived. There was no accusation in the statement, just fact. Ronan nodded once. "We did." Her gaze flicked to Vesper, lingering there for a moment longer than necessary. The dog met her eyes calmly, head slightly tilted, ears forward. No challenge, no submission, recognition perhaps. "I saw smoke last night," she continued. "Didn't expect to." Ronan exhaled slowly. "I can explain." She held up a gloved hand, stopping him before the words fully formed. "You don't need to," she said. "Not yet." She took another step closer, then another, stopping again at a respectful distance. Close enough to see the details now, the faint tremor in her hands from cold, the way her shoulders squared against the wind even though it had died down. "I met a Marlowe," she said. "I keep an eye on this stretch of land." Ronan studied her as carefully as she studied him. There was no fear in her stance, but there was caution, a practiced one. "Ronan Hale," he replied. "This is Vesper." At his name, Vesper's tail moved once, slow and measured. Etta nodded. "He's a working dog." Ronan blinked. He was. She smiled faintly, the expression brief but genuine. Once is usually enough. She turned her attention back to the shelter door, then to the hillside above it. Her eyes softened, not with sentiment, but with familiarity. "I check this place when the weather turns," she said. "Not every day, just when it matters." Ronan felt something in his chest loosen, just slightly. "We didn't plan to stay," he said. "The storm moved faster than forecast. We took shelter for the night. We used our own supplies." "I figured," Etta replied. "The smoke was clean, controlled. That stove doesn't forgive mistakes." She looked at him again, more directly this time. "You know how to use it?" "Yes, ma'am." Her eyes flicked to his clothes, the worn tactical shirt, the red thermal visible at the collar, the scuffed boots, the old military watch on his wrist. She catalogued it all in a heartbeat. "You're not a hiker who got lucky," she said. Ronan didn't argue. Silence stretched between them, comfortable but weighted. Finally, Etta spoke again. "The man who built that shelter didn't want it treated like a home." Ronan nodded. "I noticed." "That's good," she said. "Means you're paying attention." She shifted her stance, one hand resting on her hip. "The storm's passed, but the roads won't be clear for a while. You're welcome to stay until they are." Ronan hesitated, not because he doubted her authority, but because accepting things had never come easily to him. "I don't want to overstep," he said carefully. Etta studied him for a long moment, then looked down at Vesper again. "He hasn't relaxed," she said quietly. "Not fully. That tells me you're not done here yet." Ronan followed her gaze. Vesper stood calmly, but his weight remained slightly forward, his attention outward, watchful, waiting. "I'll let the owner know you're here," Etta continued. "He doesn't live nearby anymore. Hasn't for years. But he trusts me to keep this place. The way it's meant to be." "And how is that?" Ronan asked. She met his eyes. unclaimed. The word settled heavily in the air. Etta turned, her boots crunching softly as she stepped back toward the tree line. "I'll come by again," she said over her shoulder. "Later today or tomorrow. Depends on the roads." She paused, then added without looking back, "Don't clear the roof. Snow insulates." Then she was gone, disappearing between the trees with the quiet confidence of someone who had walked this land in all seasons. Ronan stood there for a long moment, watching the place where she had vanished. He hadn't asked how she knew about the roof. Vesper exhaled, a slow, controlled breath, and finally sat. Ronan crouched beside him and scratched behind his ears. The dog leaned subtly into the touch. "That went better than expected," Ronan murmured. Vesper's tail thumped once. They spent the morning in deliberate motion. Ronan checked the shelter's exterior for damage, careful not to disturb the snowpack on top. He reinforced a loose vent cover, cleared a narrow path to the stream below, and returned inside to log what he had used on a scrap of paper tucked into his pack. Habit again. Accountability. Inside, the painted wall caught his eye once more in the daylight. The colors were clearer now, still faded but intentional. Blues layered carefully, greens softened by age, the horizon line imperfect, human. He wondered what kind of person painted like that. Someone patient, someone who didn't need perfection to feel complete. Vesper lay near the door, eyes half-lidded but alert, tracking the forest beyond the threshold. Around midday, Ronan stepped outside again, scanning the tree line. The storm clouds had thinned, replaced by a pale blue sky that felt almost fragile in its clarity. The world looked newly made. He considered pulling out his phone, considered sending a message, considered all the places he could be instead. Then he looked at the shelter, half buried and stubborn, doing exactly what it had been built to do. He decided to wait, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because something about this place, and the woman who watched it, felt unfinished. Vesper shifted beside him, gaze steady, as if in agreement. Ronan tightened his gloves and turned back inside, closing the door gently behind them. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the light sharpened again, Vesper did something Ronan had never seen him do. The dog stood suddenly, ears forward, body angled toward the forest, but not in alarm. His tail lifted slightly, slow and deliberate. He took 3 steps forward, stopped, and sat, not at the door, not at the wall, but facing the exact spot where Etta had stood that morning. Ronan followed his gaze, heart tightening with a feeling he couldn't name. "Buddy?" he whispered. Vesper did not move. For a brief, inexplicable moment, Ronan had the impression, not of being watched, but of being acknowledged. As if the land itself had registered his presence and decided for now not to object. The feeling passed as quickly as it came. Vesper relaxed, shook himself once, and returned to his post by the door. Ronan remained still, unsettled by the certainty that this pause in his life had not been accidental. Evening came quietly. The temperature dropped, but the shelter held. Ronan prepared a simple meal, again using only his own supplies. He checked the stove, then sat with his back against the wall, watching the light fade. He thought about Etta Marlowe, about the way she had spoken of the shelter, not as property, but as responsibility. He thought about the city waiting for him, about the noise, the speed. Here, time moved differently. It moved when it needed to. Vesper curled near his legs, breathing slow and even. Ronan rested his hand on the dog's back, feeling the steady rise and fall. Just a little longer, he said softly. Outside, the forest did not argue. Calvin Thorne arrived without ceremony. No engine announced him. No footsteps rushed ahead of him. Ronan noticed the change first in the way the forest adjusted. Small birds lifting from branches, the quiet tension that moved through undergrowth when another presence entered the space. Vesper rose from his place near the shelter door, posture straightening, not alarmed, not territorial, simply attentive. Ronan stepped outside. The man coming up the slope was tall, though age had folded him slightly forward at the shoulders. He moved with the careful economy of someone who knew exactly how much effort each step cost and refused to waste any of it. His coat was a heavy canvas work jacket, brown once but now faded to the color of wet bark, the elbows reinforced with darker patches. Beneath it, a wool sweater showed at the collar, practical and plain. Calvin Thorne was in his early 60s, perhaps a little more. His face was angular, carved by years of wind and concentration rather than emotion. A neatly trimmed beard, more gray than brown now, framed a mouth that rarely smiled but didn't frown without reason either. His eyes, steel blue and clear, missed very little. They were the eyes of an engineer, always measuring, always testing assumptions. He stopped several yards away and took in the scene. The shelter, the snowpack, the cleared vent. Ronan, Vesper. His gaze lingered on the dog last. "Well," Calvin said, voice low and even, "you didn't burn it down." Ronan almost smiled, almost. "No, sir," he replied. "We were careful." Calvin nodded once, as if that answer had been expected. He stepped closer, boots crunching softly in the snow, and crouched near the shelter wall. He ran his gloved hand along a reinforced seam Ronan had sealed the day before, fingers pressing lightly, testing. "You didn't overdo it," Calvin said. "Most people do. They think more material means more safety." Ronan shrugged. "Sometimes it just means stress in the wrong place." That earned him a longer look. Calvin straightened slowly and finally met Ronan's eyes. Up close, the lines in his face were clearer now. Not just age, but grief held in check. The kind that had learned how to coexist with routine. "You've done this kind of work before," Calvin said. "Different context," Ronan replied. "Same principles." Calvin's gaze flicked briefly to Ronan's old military watch, then back to his face. He didn't ask follow-up questions. Engineers respected function over biography. "I'm Calvin Thorne," he said. "I built this shelter." Ronan nodded. "Ronan Hale." Calvin extended a gloved hand. Ronan shook it. The grip was firm but not competitive. A handshake meant to confirm, not dominate. "And that's your partner," Calvin added, glancing at Vesper. "He is," Ronan said. Vesper stepped forward on his own, sniffed Calvin's glove once, then twice. He did not retreat. He did not press closer either. After a moment, he sat. Calvin noticed. "So," Calvin said, standing again, "Etta tells me you took shelter during the storm." "Yes, sir. One night. We didn't use the stored supplies." "I know," Calvin said. "The log is still where I left it." Ronan blinked. "You keep a log?" Calvin's mouth twitched slightly. "Of course I do." He gestured toward the door. "May I?" Ronan stepped aside. "It's yours." Inside, the shelter felt smaller with another person in it, not crowded, just occupied. Calvin moved slowly, deliberately, taking in each detail. The stove, the shelves, the battery bank, the tools. He noticed what Ronan hadn't touched, and what he had. "You understand restraint," Calvin said at last. Ronan didn't respond. He didn't know how to explain that restraint had once been the difference between going home and not. Calvin's eyes drifted to the painted wall. He stopped there. The shift was subtle, but Ronan saw it. The way Calvin's shoulders eased, just slightly. The way his breath changed. "My wife painted that," Calvin said quietly. He didn't look at Ronan when he spoke. He looked at the wall. Her name was Margaret. She didn't care much for symmetry, said nature never bothered with straight lines, so why should she? The paint was faded enough now that the brush strokes barely showed, but Calvin's eyes traced them as if they were still fresh. "She insisted on putting it here," he continued. "I told her this was a shelter, not a cabin. She said that was exactly why it needed color." Ronan felt the weight of the words settle in his chest. "I didn't touch it," he said. Calvin nodded. "I noticed." Silence filled the space. Not awkward, not heavy. Just present. "I moved closer to my son a few years back," Calvin said. "Couldn't bring myself to sell the land. Couldn't bring myself to live here either. This place, it holds too much." Ronan understood that without explanation. "I asked Etta to keep an eye on it," Calvin went on. "Make sure no one stripped it for scrap. Make sure it stayed what it was meant to be." "And what was that?" Ronan asked. Calvin turned to face him fully. A pause. The word landed softly, but it carried. For hunters caught in bad weather, for hikers who misjudged daylight, for anyone who needed a place to not die long enough to remember why they wanted to live. Ronan swallowed. "I'm planning to head back to the city," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Soon. But if you're willing, I'd like to stay a little longer, just long enough to help make sure everything here is solid. As a thank you." Calvin studied him for a long moment. He looked at Ronan's posture, his hands, the way he stood slightly angled, as if still guarding a perimeter. Then he looked at Vesper. The dog had settled near the painted wall again, lying down with his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but aware. Calvin exhaled slowly. "All right," he said, "but on one condition." Ronan waited. "You don't turn this place into something else," Calvin said. "No expansions, no personalization. You fix what needs fixing, and you leave the rest alone." Ronan nodded immediately. "Agreed." Calvin's eyes softened, just a fraction. Margaret wouldn't have liked clutter. Ronan surprised himself by smiling. They walked outside together. Calvin pointed out areas that needed attention. The vent on the north side, a stress line near the foundation, a section of earth that tended to collect meltwater in spring. Ronan listened, filed it all away. This was familiar territory, problems with clear edges. Before leaving, Calvin stopped near the edge of the clearing. "You're not running from anything, are you?" he asked, not accusing, not gentle, just curious. Ronan considered the question. "No," he said finally. "I'm just not in a hurry." Calvin nodded. "That's usually when people make their best decisions." He turned to go, then paused. "Keep the wall." "I will." Calvin walked back down the slope, his figure slowly absorbed by the trees. That evening, as Ronan tightened a support brace near the shelter wall, Vesper suddenly stood and placed himself between Ronan and the painted wall. Not aggressively, deliberately. The dog's body formed a quiet barrier, his eyes fixed on Ronan, not warning, not fear, but insistence. Ronan froze. It took him a moment to realize his mistake. He had been about to hang a tool rack too close to the mural, not touching it, but encroaching on its space. "Okay," Ronan murmured, stepping back. "I hear you." Vesper relaxed instantly and lay down again, satisfied. Ronan stared at the wall, heart thudding with an unfamiliar reverence. This place had rules, and somehow the dog knew them better than he did. Night came gently. Ronan worked until the light faded, then stopped. He didn't push through fatigue. He cleaned up, returned tools to their places, and recorded the day's work in the margin of his own notebook, not the shelter's log. The shelter stood quiet and steady around him. He sat near the wall, careful not to lean against it, and ate his meal slowly. The city still existed. The job offer still waited. But for now, Ronan felt no pull toward it. Only the strange, steady sense that this pause, this shelter, this painted wall, this watchful dog, was doing exactly what it had been built to do. Outside, the forest settled. Inside, Ronan stayed. Ronan learned the rhythm of the shelter the same way he had learned every other place that mattered to him. By listening. Morning arrived earlier now. Not warm, not generous, but brighter. The light slid down the slope and touched the shelter wall in a way that revealed flaws the night hid. Hairline fractures in concrete. Subtle shifts where freeze and thaw argued with gravity. Ronan noticed everything. He always had. Vesper noticed first. The German shepherd no longer rose stiffly at dawn. His body still moved with purpose, but the edge had softened. He stretched long front paws pressing into the floor, back arching, breath deep and satisfied. 5 years old, strong, alert, but no longer braced for impact. That change mattered. Ronan brewed water and ate sparingly, then stepped outside with his tools. The forest smelled different now. Not sharp like storm air, but damp, alive. Snow melted in thin rivulets that traced invisible maps across the ground. Somewhere downslope, water moved again beneath ice. He worked methodically. He reinforced the north vent Calvin had pointed out, careful to leave snow packed along the roofline. He adjusted drainage near the foundation, redirecting meltwater away from stress points. He didn't rush. Rushing caused mistakes. Mistakes in cold places didn't forgive. Vesper followed him, occasionally stopping to sniff the air, occasionally sitting to watch. Not guarding, observing. That was new too. By mid-morning, Ronan slung his pack over his shoulder and followed the narrow track Etta had mentioned, just visible now beneath receding snow, down toward the small village nestled beyond the tree line. The village wasn't much. A cluster of buildings pressed close together for warmth more than community. A general store, a diner that doubled as a post office, a fuel pump that looked older than Ronan's watch. People noticed him immediately. Not because he was threatening, because he was unfamiliar. Ronan felt it the way you felt pressure changes before a storm. Conversations slowed, heads turned, then turned away again. Northern courtesy, acknowledgement without invitation. Vesper walked at his side, harness snug, tail neutral. Children watched the dog with wide eyes from behind windows. One elderly man nodded once as Ronan passed, then returned to scraping ice from his windshield. At the hardware counter, Ronan waited while the clerk finished ringing up a woman buying nails and propane. The clerk was a man in his late 40s, broad-shouldered but soft around the middle, with thinning blonde hair and a mustache that tried to look authoritative but failed. His name tag read, Mark. "You fixing something?" Mark asked, tone neutral but curious. "Shelter up the hill," Ronan replied. "Winter stress." Mark nodded slowly. "That old thing's still standing, huh?" Ronan said nothing. Mark rang up Ronan's purchase, sealant, a brace, a length of pipe, then hesitated. "You staying up there?" "For a bit." Mark glanced at Vesper. "Dog seems comfortable." Ronan almost smiled. Outside, a man waved him down near a pickup with a sagging fence panel in the bed. Mid-50s, lean, beard gone gray at the chin, wearing a flannel jacket that had seen better decades. His movements were stiff, one knee clearly favoring the other. "Hey," the man called. "You look like you know what you're doing." Ronan walked over. "Depends who's asking." The man chuckled. "Name's Eli Dawson. Fence came loose in the storm. Can't get it to sit right." Ronan studied the panel, then the ground. Post shifted. Needs resetting. Eli sighed. "Thought so." Ronan shrugged. "I've got time." They worked together without much talking. Ronan showed Eli how to seat the post properly, how to angle it to account for frost heave. Eli listened, asked questions, followed instructions carefully. When it was done, Eli wiped his hands on his jacket. "I owe you." Ronan shook his head. "No." Eli frowned. "Everyone owes something." Ronan thought about that. "Then maybe just keep an eye on the shelter. Make sure no one messes with it." Eli's expression shifted. Recognition, then respect. "That place saves lives," he said quietly. "Always has." They parted without ceremony. Back at the shelter, Ronan worked through the afternoon. He logged repairs in his own notebook. He left Calvin's log untouched, respecting the boundary. Vesper lay near the door, eyes half closed, ears occasionally flicking at distant sounds. A dog at ease still listened. He just didn't expect trouble. As the sun lowered, Ronan sat on the shelter step and drank from his canteen, watching light spill across the clearing. He thought about the city, about the job offer waiting in his inbox, about offices and schedules and the constant hum of expectation, about how people there asked questions that sounded like concern but felt like accounting. Out here, no one asked him who he was. They asked what he could fix. That night, the shelter held steady. No storm. Just cold. Ronan slept deeper than he had in months. The next afternoon, as Ronan tightened the last brace along the shelter's outer wall, Vesper suddenly rose and moved away from the door. Not toward the forest. Toward the open clearing. The dog stopped at the edge of the packed snow and stood perfectly still, ears forward, body relaxed, but deliberate. His gaze fixed on the village road far below, invisible from where Ronan stood. Ronan followed his line of sight. There was nothing there, no movement, no sound. Yet Vesper remained, tail lifting slightly, breath slow. Ronan felt a familiar prickle at the base of his neck, the same feeling he'd learned to trust when something important was approaching, even if it hadn't arrived yet. He didn't call the dog back, he waited. After a long moment, Vesper exhaled and returned to his spot by the door, satisfied. Ronan stared down the slope, unsettled by the certainty that staying longer wasn't just a preference. It was being noticed. Days passed. Ronan helped where he could. He repaired a loose step at the diner. He showed Mark how to insulate a pipe without trapping moisture. He shared coffee, accepted soup, said little. No one asked how long he planned to stay. They didn't need to. Vesper grew more relaxed with each passing day. He greeted familiar faces with quiet acceptance. He slept longer. He dreamed more. One evening, Ronan sat near the shelter wall, watching shadows stretch across the painted mural. He thought of Calvin's words. A pause. Ronan realized something then. Staying wasn't passive. It was a skill. It required judgment, restraint, awareness, knowing when to move and when to let the ground hold you. He wasn't stuck. He was choosing. Ronan closed his notebook and leaned back, careful not to touch the mural. "Just a little longer," he said aloud. Vesper's tail thumped once, slow and steady. Outside, the forest agreed. The first sign that the quiet had begun to ripple outward came on a day that felt almost generous. Sunlight lingered longer now, sliding through the trees at an angle that warmed one side of the shelter wall, while leaving the other in shadow. Snow had retreated into pockets and seams, stubborn in the places where the ground refused to give it up. Water moved freely again, dark and patient beneath the ice that still clung to the stream's edges. Ronan had just finished reseating a warped hinge on the shelter's interior door when Vesper lifted his head. The dog did not bark. He did not growl. He listened. Vesper was 5 years old enough to know the difference between threat and disturbance, between danger and presence. His ears angled forward, not stiff, not relaxed, his amber eyes fixed on the path leading down from the village. Ronan wiped his hands on a rag and followed the dog's gaze. He felt it too, the faint pressure of something approaching that did not belong to the land's usual rhythm. By the time the sound reached him, it was unmistakable. An engine. Not the low, familiar rattle of Eli's truck or the sputtering hum of Mark's delivery van. This was cleaner, smoother, a sound that did not often climb this far uphill. Ronan stepped outside as the vehicle came into view, a white SUV easing carefully along the narrow road, tires crunching over gravel and thaw-softened earth. It stopped well short of the shelter, as if uncertain how close was acceptable. 3 people stepped out. The woman in front was tall and lean, mid-40s, with dark hair pulled into a tight knot at the base of her skull. Her coat was a neutral gray, cut sharply, clean enough to look out of place against the mud on her boots. She moved with practiced confidence, posture straight, chin level, eyes scanning the surroundings as if already imagining them framed and edited. Behind her were 2 men, younger, late 20s, maybe early 30s. One carried a compact camera bag slung over his shoulder, his movements careful, respectful in a way that suggested he'd been warned not to rush. The other held a tablet, fingers tapping idly against the screen as he took in the shelter, the trees, the open space. Vesper stepped forward and positioned himself slightly ahead of Ronan. Not aggressive. Clear. The woman noticed immediately. She stopped several yards away and smiled. Not wide, not forced, but calibrated. The kind of smile designed to put people at ease without surrendering ground. "Ronan Hale?" she called. Ronan didn't answer right away. "Yes," he said finally. "I'm Meredith Lane," she said, "Director of Media Partnerships for North Point Outreach." The name meant nothing to him. She gestured lightly behind her. "We work with veterans, telling stories that highlight resilience, adaptation, survival." Ronan felt the words settle against him without finding purchase. Vesper's tail remained low, unmoving. "We saw a video," Meredith continued. "Short clip. You repairing a fence line down in the village. Someone posted it. It gained traction." "I didn't," Ronan said. She nodded, unfazed. "That's usually how it happens." She took a small step closer, stopping the moment Vesper's body tensed by a fraction. She noticed that too. "Beautiful place you found," she said, looking around. "Isolated, honest." Ronan crossed his arms loosely. "What do you want?" Meredith's smile softened, as if she'd been expecting the question. "We want to talk, that's all. About what you're doing here, about how you found this place, about what it means to start over." Ronan felt something tighten behind his ribs. "I'm not starting over," he said. Meredith tilted her head slightly. "Most people don't realize they are until later." The man with the camera shifted his weight. The tablet holder stopped tapping. Vesper took one step forward. Meredith raised a hand, palm open. "We won't film without permission. We don't want to intrude." Ronan almost laughed at that. You already are, he said quietly. The smile faltered. Not gone, just recalibrated. We help veterans, Meredith said, her voice lowering. We fund repairs, medical coverage. We connect people with resources, visibility. Visibility, Ronan repeated. Yes, she said, so people know you're here. Ronan looked past her, down the slope toward the village. He thought of Eli's fence, of Mark's quiet nods, of Etta watching smoke without demanding explanation. They already do, he said. Meredith followed his gaze, then looked back at him. Not like this. Silence stretched between them. Vesper's ears flicked once. His eyes never left Meredith. We'll give you time, Meredith said finally. Think about it. We'll come back tomorrow. No, Ronan said. The word landed cleanly. Meredith blinked. You haven't heard the full— No, he repeated. You won't come back. The men behind her exchanged glances. Meredith studied Ronan for a long moment, the professional calm slipping just enough to reveal something sharper beneath. You're turning down help, she said. I'm turning down ownership, Ronan replied. Her jaw tightened. Stories belong to the people who tell them. Ronan shook his head. Stories belong to the people who live them. Vesper exhaled slowly, a sound that carried weight without threat. Meredith took a step back. All right, she said. If you change your mind, I won't. She held his gaze for another second, then nodded once. We'll be in touch. The SUV turned around carefully and drove back down the road, its engine fading into the forest. The quiet rushed back in behind it, not wounded, just disturbed. Ronan stood where he was long after the sound disappeared. Vesper remained at his side, steady as ever. That night, long after darkness settled and the shelter warmed into stillness, Vesper rose abruptly from his place near the door. He did not move toward the road. He moved toward the shelf where Calvin's old logbook rested. The dog stopped there, sat, and stared. Ronan frowned. What is it? Vesper did not respond. He held his position, eyes fixed on the notebook as if it were making a sound only he could hear. Ronan approached slowly and lifted the log. It fell open to a page he had not read. 3 lines, written in careful block letters. If you let them define your story, they will decide when it ends. Help is only help when it leaves you free. Ronan closed the book, pulse steady but heavy. Vesper lay down again, satisfied. Morning came with a thin frost and a silence that felt earned. Ronan dismantled the temporary sign Meredith's team had placed near the road without asking. Nothing dramatic, just a small marker meant to guide them back. He carried it to the shelter and leaned it against the outer wall, untouched. Vesper watched, tail giving a single thoughtful wag. The village reacted quietly. Mark said nothing but refilled Ronan's thermos without charging him. Eli brought over a length of spare wire, just in case. Etta stopped by briefly, her eyes flicking toward the road, then back to Ronan. Trouble? She asked. No, Ronan said. She nodded. Good. Days passed. The land continued its slow thaw. Ronan worked, helped, stayed. The offer lingered like a ghost, but it found no place to land. Ronan realized something in the doing. The shelter did not exist to be discovered. It existed to be respected. He wasn't hiding here. He was choosing not to be claimed. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the mural caught the last light of day, Ronan sat on the step with Vesper stretched beside him. Good call, Ronan murmured. Vesper's eyes closed halfway, content. The quiet returned to its rightful owner. Spring did not arrive with celebration. It came the way truth often did. quietly, without permission, and only after everything unnecessary had already fallen away. Ronan noticed it first in Vesper. The German shepherd no longer positioned himself between Ronan and the world when strangers approached the shelter path. He still watched, still listened. But the tension that once lived just beneath his fur had loosened. He slept deeper now, sometimes stretched out in the open clearing instead of pressed near the door. His ears lay angled outward, relaxed, tracking birds and wind rather than threat. That change mattered more than any calendar. The snow retreated slowly, exposing earth that smelled dark and honest. The stream ran free now, no longer humming beneath ice but speaking openly as it cut through stone and soil. The forest shifted with it, branches uncurling, birds returning in hesitant waves. Ronan worked less, not because there was nothing left to do, but because the work had changed. It was no longer about shoring up defenses or correcting damage. It was maintenance now. Care. The kind that respected what already held. One morning, as he finished checking the drainage near the foundation, a familiar truck climbed the slope. Calvin Thorne stepped out, moving slower than before but with the same deliberate economy. He wore the same weathered jacket, though the collar sat looser now, as if winter had finally loosened its grip on him too. Ronan met him halfway. "You stayed," Calvin said, not as a question. Ronan nodded. "Long enough?" Calvin's eyes moved across the shelter, the clearing, the mural catching light through the open door. He noticed the subtle changes, the strengthened joints, the careful absence of excess. "You kept your word," Calvin said. Ronan shrugged. "It was yours first." Calvin smiled then, not briefly, not cautiously, a real smile, worn and earned. They sat on the shelter step and shared coffee without ceremony. Vesper lay nearby, chin on his paws, eyes half-lidded but aware. "I sold the house near my son," Calvin said eventually. "Didn't feel right holding on to two places when one was already holding me." Ronan said nothing. He knew better than to interrupt decisions that had taken years to form. "I've been thinking about this place," Calvin continued, "about what it was meant to be and what it's become." "And what's that?" Ronan asked. Calvin looked at him. "A choice." The word settled between them. "I don't want it to turn into a landmark," Calvin said, "or a story people tell to feel better about themselves. But I also don't want it empty." Ronan waited. "I'm not asking you to stay forever," Calvin said. "I'm asking if you'd consider staying because you want to, not because you need to." Ronan felt the weight of the question, not heavy, but precise. "I won't put my name on it," Calvin added. "No ownership papers, no contracts, just responsibility. If one day you leave, you leave. The shelter stays what it is." Ronan looked at the mural again. The imperfect horizon, the quiet color. "I can do that," he said. Calvin nodded once, satisfied. They parted without ceremony. Calvin walked back down the slope, his figure steady, unburdened. That afternoon, Ronan packed his bag, not because he planned to leave, but because he needed to see what it felt like to be ready. He laid everything out on the shelter floor. Tools, clothes, supplies, the old phone, the notebook, the watch. Vesper watched from the doorway, head tilted slightly, ears relaxed. When Ronan reached for the notebook, Vesper stood. The dog crossed the room and placed himself between Ronan and the open door, not blocking, not commanding, present. Ronan froze. The realization came quietly, without drama. For the first time in years, he was packing out of habit, not necessity. He sat down slowly and closed the bag. "Yeah," he murmured. I know. Vesper stepped aside and returned to his place, satisfied. The village changed its posture toward Ronan without ever saying so aloud. Mark started leaving the back door unlocked when he knew Ronan was working late. Eli waved him over for coffee without explaining why. Children stopped asking if they could pet Vesper and simply waited to see if he'd approach first. Etta came by less often, not because she stopped caring, but because she no longer needed to watch. One evening, Ronan stood alone in the clearing, watching dusk settle across the trees. The sky burned gold and pale violet before cooling into blue. The shelter behind him held warmth easily now, as if it had accepted him the way the land had. He thought about the city, about the life he'd built there after the uniform came off, the noise, the speed, the constant sense of being evaluated, by employers, by strangers, by himself. He understood now that nothing there had chased him away. He had simply stopped running. Vesper lay down at his feet, long and loose, eyes closed, the posture of an animal that no longer felt responsible for holding the world together. Ronan rested a hand on the dog's shoulder. "Good place," he said quietly. Vesper's tail thumped once. Later that night, Ronan wrote one final entry in his notebook. Not a plan, not a promise, just a record. Stayed because I wanted to. Left nothing broken. Took nothing that wasn't given. He placed the notebook on the shelf beside Calvin's log and Margaret's mural, not as an addition, just context. Morning arrived pale and clean. Ronan woke early, as always, but without urgency. He made coffee, he checked the shelter, he stepped outside. The road lay open, clear, waiting. He didn't follow it. Instead, he turned back toward the trees, toward the work that would never be finished and never needed to be. Vesper rose and followed. They moved together into the forest, not to disappear, but to remain. Sometimes, miracles do not arrive as thunder or fire from the sky. They arrive quietly. Through a pause we did not plan, a path we almost ignored, or a companion who knew when we were too tired to keep running. God does not always remove the storm. Sometimes He places shelter along the way. Sometimes He slows our steps long enough for us to hear what our hearts have been trying to say all along. In our daily lives, we chase answers, safety, approval, and purpose. But perhaps faith is not about reaching a destination faster. Perhaps it is about recognizing the moment when God asks us to stop, to breathe, and to trust that where we stand right now is not an accident. If this story spoke to you, if it reminded you to slow down, to listen, or to believe again, consider sharing it with someone who might need that reminder today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, or what this story stirred in your heart. And if you believe in stories that honor quiet strength, loyalty, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing them with you. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps. May He grant you peace when the road is long, courage when the path is unclear, and rest when it is time to stop running. You are not unseen, and you are not alone.